This video is about the other two types of clustering techniques, that is basically hierarchy clustering and the density based clustering. The first type, that is basically partitional clustering. So partitional clustering, that K means clustering, so which comes under partitional clustering. So that is the first time. So what is hierarchical clustering? So hierarchical clustering, basically it groups the data into a tree of clusters. So unlike other methods like k-means clustering, which actually requires to specify the number of clusters. That is, in the k-means we had to specify the number of clusters, whereas the hierarchical clustering just builds a multi-level hierarchy where we can choose the level of granularity. So there are two main approaches actually in the hierarchical clustering. The first one is the agglomerative, which is a bottom-up type, and the another one is the divisive, that is top-down. I'm just going to briefly tell what this agglomerative, that is bottom up, as well as the divisive, that is top down type. Maybe in the next slide we shall discuss with an example that will give more clarity. So what is this agglomerative, the bottom up? This is the most common method. So basically what we do here is that every data point, it starts as its own cluster. So the algorithm then repeatedly merges the two closest clusters until one single cluster remains containing all the data points. This is basically the bottom up approach that we have it. And in the case of division, that is top down, so these all data points, so they actually start as one chain cluster. Then algorithm recursively splits the clusters until every data point is separate. So this is basically top down approach what we have in the division. So these are mainly the two main approaches that we have in the hierarchical clustering. So the visualization, what we say actually, what we do in this one, call this one as a dendrogram. Sorry, the the result is usually visualized as a dendrogram. It's like a tree type diagram, a tree kind of thing that we have it. So that records a sequence of mergers. Either one can merge or one can split, depending on what approach you follow. So by getting the tree at a certain height, we decide how many clusters we want. So what are the key points that we have discussed? That will get more clarity when we discuss, when I'm going to discuss with an example. So yeah, this is basically the broad one definition of what we have in the hierarchy clustering. Just to take on one very simple example. So and imagine trying to classify a newly discovered set of animals. So basically what we do is that initially we what is the process is that actually we start with individual species, that we have it lion, tiger, wolf, or dog. For example, that is considered lion, tiger, wolf, and dog. So what is done here is that this is the bottom up approach that is followed. That is what I discussed here, the agglomerative. So that is actually we merge here. So basically what is done here is that since actually lion and tiger actually both belong to the cat family, so actually we group the wolf and dog together. That's what it has been mentioned here, cats. So the distance between the lion and tiger is very less here, so that is what is measured here, the distance as well as dissimilarity. So here the lion and tiger are more similar, so whereas lion and the dog, they are dissimilar, so the distance is more here. So in the case of this one, the lion and tiger, we merge and then we belong to the cat family. Then similarly, actually, we group the wolf and the dog here. So we group the wolf and the dog together because they belong to the canine family. So wolf and the dog are um, so this wolf and the dog are merged together, which belong to the canine family. And finally, we can see that actually cats and canines, there is some similarity here. So both are actually carnivorous. That's what at the higher level. So we merge the cat as well as the canines. We cluster them into a larger carnivorous cluster. So what is the result? Actually, we don't just get groups here, but we get a lineage showing how closely related different groups are. That's what actually we do it in the case of hierarchical clustering. So basically, if we just see here, um, we don't actually just get groups here. The same thing actually what we did in the k-means clustering, different clusters we are forming, different groups we are forming. But in the case of this one, actually, we get a lineage actually showing the family lineage like this way. Carnivorous, maybe cats also belong to the carnivorous, canines also belong to the carnivorous, lion and tiger. So they are actually, we can just see that actually there is a lineage actually showing how closely related different groups are. So that's what actually one example that has been considered to show the hierarchical clustering. Basically, the advantages of hierarchical clustering, what we have is, as you can see here, so advantages, mainly two advantages. As you can see, the this hierarchical clustering, basically the relationship is highlighted, right? So the relationship is highlighted here between the different objects at a finer level. And also the second advantage is that actual results are easily interpretable. Means one can easily interpret from the results what is the kind of relationship that we have between the different data objects. Limitation is actually they're very computationally expensive. So let me write it here. So limitation is um, it's computationally expensive, and the second one is that actually, uh, of course, they are adversely affected by noise and outliers in the data set. Noise and outliers. So they are adversely affected by the noise and the outliers, and it's computationally expensive. So these two are the limitations that we have it in the hierarchy clustering. As I mentioned earlier, so we have these two types, that is the agglomerative, the bottom approach and top down approach. That becomes more clear actually if I try to if I am going to discuss here with an example here. So what is considered here is that real world clustering example. If we just look at this one, this is what the bottom up approach that is being followed here. That is an agglomerative type of clustering, hierarchical clustering. Whereas in this one, it's a top-down approach, which is um the divisive type of hierarchical clustering. So hierarchy, we can just observe that one. It's like following either bottom up or the top down. For example, in the if we have the cluster here, we see that the process begins at the very bottom with the individual, that is employees. So in clustering terms, what we say is that every single data point starts as its own tiny cluster. So here what the process actually just goes, we keep on actually merging upward. So when we keep on merging upward, so basically actually the arrow points, the arrows actually, whatever the arrows that are pointing, they are actually pointing upwards, indicating a merging process. So usually as we see the merge closest groups. So whichever whoever employees are closer, they are merged together. So that's what is mentioned here. So employees who are close together, they form a team here. So employees who are close together, they form a team here. So finally, actually which teams actually are close to each other, they form different departments. Then different departments actually which are close together, they form different divisions. Finally, actually they are actually one different divisions, they come under the CEO. So this is usually applied in the corporate hierarchy, whatever the bottom up approach of the this is a real world scenario where the clusters are formed. The employees, based on their taste, based on their work, the similar work, how closely they are related, what kind of project they have taken, what kind of work they do it. That's how actually they come together and they form a team. So different teams, they come and they form a departments. Like that way it goes up. This is what we have it in the market segmentation division. Whenever we have to study the total market, it's like we have come from the top down approach. So here the total market, which is represented by a large diverse crowd of people. So the total market, which is represented by the large diverse crowd. So that's what actually the represents the total market. So in clustering terms, what we say is that all the data points actually start in one massive cluster. This is one massive cluster that we have it. Whereas in this one, actually, we had only single cluster, or we can say tiny cluster in the case of the agglomerative. Whereas in the case of divisive market segmentation, we call that one as a massive cluster. So total market, which is represented by the large, diverse crowd of people. So as we can see here, in the case of the agglomerative, we just actually merged, whereas in this divisive, we just divide. That's what we split it here, right? So the total, the arrows actually pointing downwards here. So the arrows point downwards, indicating a splitting process. So here, this is important, split by biggest difference. So when we say split by biggest difference, whenever like we have the total market, if it has to split between the two broad groups, so how do we split that one? So whenever there is a biggest difference, that has to be split. So one difference is demographic segments, that is age or location. Second segment is the behavioral segment, that is interest. And again, actually, we keep on splitting this one demographic segments based on the age. For example, as you can see, the retirees, they actually come in this one, whereas the young urban professionals, because the retirees needs are different than the young urban professionals. Similarly, actually, the behavioral segment, so the interests. So the interest, actually, tech enthusiasts, their interest is different from the outdoor adventurers. So in this way, so if you have to study the total market, if you have to bring the product, so what all things that we have to study by taking total market as a cluster. So the main thing, actually, difference between the agglomerative and the divisive market is the, in the agglomerative we merge the closest groups, whereas here we split by the biggest difference. So if I have to highlight in the red color here, this is what we merge the closest groups in the case of agglomerative corporate, for example, the bottom up approach. Whereas in the case of divisive, the top down approach, we split by biggest difference. So here merging is done, here splitting is done. So that is a basic difference between the agglomerative as well as the market segmentation. Based on the what requirement, we just actually follow that type of hierarchical clustering technique. So that's it for the hierarchical clustering technique. And okay, the next one is the density based clustering. So density based clustering groups the data points that are closely packed together. For example, high density, and marks the points that lie alone in the low density group regions as outliers. So, so density-based clustering groups the data points that are closely packed together. So, which are data objects that are which are closely packed together? That is where the high density is there. So that what it does. All the data points which are closely packed together, it just actually clusters that one. It forms one cluster. Sorry, and marks the points that lie alone in the low density regions as the noise. With this, actually, I will become more clear if I consider when I consider the real world example. Of course, the most famous algorithm in this category is the DB scan, what we call that one as density based spatial clustering of applications with the noise. So basically, how it works is that it defines a cluster based on two parameters. One is what we call the epsilon. So it's a radius around a data point. That's what is found here. And next one is the minimum point. So the minimum number of points required within that radius to form a dense region. So one data point is considered, and that one radius is formed. Within that radius, what all different points, the minimum number of points which are required within that radius, with that forms a dense region. Okay, so if a point has enough neighbors in the radius, it becomes a core point and starts a cluster. The cluster expands by connecting to other dense points. So points in low density areas that are far away from any cluster with are labeled as noise. So this becomes more clear when I consider another example. Yeah. So key advantages, basically the arbitrary shapes, like unlike k-means which forces, okay, in the k-means we saw that actually it forces the clusters in circles or spheres. Density based clustering can find clusters in different shapes. So that is the biggest advantage which we have. It non-spherical thing also can be worked out in the density based clustering. So for example, any kind of snake like shapes or rings, something like that way. So outlier detection is very easy in the case of this density based clustering. So it automatically identifies and isolates the noise here. So one very good example that has been taken is that urban planning and geography. So Let's see how we are imagine analyzing locations of houses in a large state to identify the towns. So a task has been given actually to identify uh, the location of the houses in a large state to identify the towns. So we just actually plot every house in a map, and the dense regions. So areas with many houses, when they're packed closely together, at high density, they are identified as the cities or the towns. So which the areas actually where the many houses mean large number of houses they are packed closer together, where the density is high means more number of houses at a single place. So they are identified as the cities or towns. A town built along a river might be long and thin. So density cluster handles this shape perfectly, whereas other methods might split the town in half. Okay, so this becomes more clear. I've written a lot of diagram also for this one. So isolated farmhouses located miles away from anyone else are not forced into a cluster. They are correctly identified as rural, isolated, noise or outliers. We call that one. So this is what the four things which are involved in analyzing the locations houses when we have to do that one last way to identify the towns. So same thing we had has been plotted here in the diagram as we can see here. So this is the density based clustering, the urban planning example. So black dot, whatever these black dots are there, they're basically the houses. Okay, so in a large state, okay, some area, let me consider area instead of saying the state actually, where we have to identify the towns, which one is a town, which one is something, a noise in this one, which is far away from the town. So in order to actually see that what benefits actually go to the people in a proper way or not, in order to do that one, which in order to locate the urban and the rural area or the outlier in this example if I have to consider here. So the black dot house and the colored region, so these are basically the identified town. So this is one town that is observed and this is one town which is observed. As you can see here, I said about this one, this is, if you see, one point is considered and the radius is formed, within that one how many the minimum number of points that are taken here. It is then this, they are very very close together, so that actually forms one town which called a high density cluster here. And also we can see here the other thing I said that, okay, these all things are noise here because they are far away from this dense cluster. So these are all are what whatever these things are considered, they are basically the noise, a rural or the isolated houses that we say it, right? So I said another point here, the arbitrary shapes also it considers that one. The advantage is you can see here, if there are many houses along the river path here, here also the density is high here, even though actually it doesn't fit in this kind of shape here, but since actually they're very close to formed here, it also forms one cluster. That's what we say this one as a river town, even though it's an arbitrary shape. It doesn't have to be a spherical shape. It's like a snake shape that we have it there. So here also we can form one cluster and we can call that one as a river town. So there's an advantage we have it in the density based clustering. So this is about density based clustering. Yeah, one disadvantage that we have it is that the limitation is uh, uh, difficult to identify the clusters of varying densities. So whenever the density is varying too much, that case actually it very difficult to identify the clusters. We have only one high density area here, so that is something we can identify as a town A. But there are very other clusters of varying densities, so that is very difficult to be um, to identify the clusters by the density based clustering. So, so this is about density based clustering, and yeah, thank you.